I think it's completely brilliant that digital SLRs can now shoot HD video. But does that mean buying an expensive DSLR camera with a video capability? Will that give you some interesting videos? Will you come back with your holiday footage and say, oh, hey, come and check out where we went on holiday? Will everyone just scatter like in all sorts of different directions and have to go to the kitchen, importantly, because the dreaded holiday videos just come out? Shooting video is a very different skill set to just shooting stills. And when I say just shooting, I don't mean to belittle shooting stills. I've been doing it for years and I know how complicated it can be. But there are other elements to consider. You've got to deal with motion, with movement. And I don't mean movement of the camera, I mean movement of things going on within the image. You also have to think about sound. Sound is really, really important when shooting video. A video without sound is really often quite dull. In fact, sound can be the most important component of a video because a video is telling a story. So you need to think about sound. The best thing about shooting video with a DSLR is the amazing cinematic look you can get because you're exploiting the creative qualities of the lenses that you've already got. One of the disadvantages of shooting video with a DSLR is it's very, very hard to shoot live action, things that are on the move. Imagine running around after the kids in the park or something like that. That's because it's quite hard to hold a DSLR steady out at arm's length like that and to follow the action. You're going to get a lot of wobbliness going on. It's one thing when you're shooting a still and the camera's up to your eye and you're sort of balancing it and bracing it against your body, and the movements will be frozen by a fast enough shutter speed so that you have a still image or camera shake. When you're shooting video, you want to try and minimize wobbles and movement of the camera, and when you're shooting live action, that can be very, very difficult. But the only way you can do it is to use a DSLR video rig. Here's one I looked up online last night and found on Amazon. Now, a DSLR video rig is a frame that you can mount your camera into, and you can fit accessories around that frame. You can have like a matte box or like a big lens hood to cut out lens flare. You can clip external microphones to it and even an LCD monitor so that you can see what you're filming a little clearer. Because following live action and focusing upon it with a DSLR is really quite tricky, I would suggest that when you're starting out, you're better off to shoot lots of clips and then join them together in the edit. You can record some voiceover as you're filming it, or you can record some voiceover when you're editing it, and then it may give you a little bit more of time to think. But when you're shooting the clips, use a tripod. Now, I'm a big fan of a ball head tripod. Here's one of my old favourites. But they're not the best for using with a DSLR, simply because if you want to sort of move the camera and do some pans, they're a bit jerky and they're not terribly good. If video is something you think you'd be interested in, you're much better to invest in an oil-filled video head, a bit like the one we use most of the time with our video camera. But when you mount a DSLR on it, as you can see, the movements are really smooth and really fluid. Think about your sound too. The microphone on a DSLR, the built-in one, is a minute, tiny little thing on the side of the camera, and the sound quality isn't very good at all. If you put an external mic onto the top of the camera, that makes an enormous difference. Or using radio mics. Another way of doing it is you could get a recording device. You can get sound recorders which work with a little lapel mic like this one I'm using here, and record the sound into that, and then you can add it later on into the edit. Also, watch out for wind noise. If it's a breezy day, a microphone on the top of the camera, or even one on your shirt, they can pick up wind noise. It's a nasty sort of nasty sound. Have a look for a softy windshield. Here's one which goes onto the microphone we occasionally use on top of the big camera. Now you can get a microphone not as big as that and get it on top of your DSLR. Have a look online. I googled last night and I found a whole pile of softy windshields ranging all sorts of prices and all sorts of sizes that will fit all sorts of microphones. There are also some settings you're going to need to apply to your camera. These are settings which you'd never use if you were shooting stills. This is stuff unique to video. Pop into your menu and go to the picture controls, if I can find them, and choose any one of them. I'm going to choose neutral, go down to sharpening and dial the sharpening right down to just 1 or 2. You only want a tiniest bit of sharpening, if any at all. And the contrast, take that right down to nothing. You want no contrast in there whatsoever. Now, why would you do such a silly thing? Because you're shooting video. If you're shooting in a very high contrast situation, you may find that shadows will just block up, they'll go black, there'll be no detail there at all. So you're better off to capture as wide a tonal range as you possibly can by having super low contrast, and you can always add some contrast in the edit suite afterwards. Regardless of what program you're using, there are many free ones out there, free video editors. You can still add a bit of contrast and bring it back later. But if there's too much contrast, you can't take it away. The other setting you're going to need to do yourself is white balance. I don't recommend using auto white balance when you're videoing because you can find there are colour shifts going on. So just all you have to do is just pop in and, as usual, just change your white balance settings from sunny to shady to cloud or whatever it may be. Exposure for video with a DSLR is a different ball game to that with stills as well. When you're shooting video, you have things called frame rates. Now, don't get too hung up about what that means, but a 24-25 frames per second frame rate will give you the nicest look to your video. You don't really want to go much faster than that if you can possibly help it. To get a 25 frame per second frame rate, you need to set a 50th of a second shutter speed on the camera. I don't know why that happens like that. It's something to do with the pixel fairies that live in there. They're a bit mad, I reckon. So that means your shutter speed is going to be set fairly constant. And if you're like me, I like using my shutter speed to control exposure, but suddenly you can't really do that. You don't want to go changing it in the middle of a video because it will change the way the video looks. It will give it a slightly different feel. So all of a sudden, your exposure control has become your apertures. So that means you're going to increase or decrease your exposure by using a larger or a smaller aperture. But then what happens to those creative uses for apertures? How are you going to exploit your beautiful lenses and all their characteristics of depth of field, etc., if you've got to use a little tiny aperture to try and cut out light because you can't increase the shutter speed? Well, you can use neutral density filters. You can stack a neutral density filter onto the front of your lens and that will remove a bunch of light. Some are stronger than others. You can use several together if you want to. But another way of doing it is you can just use one of these, a polarizing filter. Now, a polarizing filter removes 2 stops of light. So just by popping one of them on the front of your lens, you're going to cut the exposure by 2 stops. And that's going to give you 2 more stops to play with on your lens. You don't have to apply the effect of the polarizer. You can just rotate it around and have a look. And you may not want to apply the effect of the polarizer, in which case just rotate it until it disappears. It will still remove 2 stops of light. Having just one shot on the screen for a very long time can make for a very boring piece of video unless you've got someone talking to you or something's going on, there's some action happening which will hold the viewer's attention. I'm going to show you what I mean in a moment. We've come out here into the forest to a pond not that far from where I live, because if you're going to practice this stuff, don't try and take on the world straight away. Don't try and shoot street life in the big city before you've learned kind of how to go about it. So there are 2 ways to shoot a video. There's the running around way, and then there's the shooting clips, which I touched upon earlier. Let me just show you what I mean. So let's say we're going to do a little thing about, hey look, we've come to visit Iworth Pond. How would we video that? Well, first off, you do need to set up your exposure. Don't forget you've got a 50th of a second going on, so you have to use that, and then adjust your aperture until the light meter says the exposure is correct, which it does now with F18 that's giving me. Now we're ready to shoot some video. So I press the live view button, hope the light doesn't go up and down too much, that looks okay in here. And let's just shoot a bit of video, the way most people would go about it. This is Iworth Pond in the New Forest, and we came here for a day out. It's an absolutely brilliant place. Look at all this water we've got going on over here. It's such a pretty pond. And look at these lilies. Don't these lilies look wonderful? Look at those. And I really like these bits of greenery in the edge of the water. And there's a duck over there too. So that's one way of shooting some video. This time we're going to use the tripod, and we're going to think take a little bit more time over it. So let's just think, what do we want? Our establishing shot with the pond, etc. Let's get this sign here and let's see if we can include a little bit of what's going on over here as well. So we're going to look across the sign like that. See what I mean? A little bit of thought. When you're running around with it in your hand, you often don't think quite so much. So let's get the camera a little closer. Set up my shot. Oh, I like that already. We've got just a little hint of what's going on over there. Focusing, you can't autofocus when you're videoing, so flick the camera onto autofocus before you turn it on. Did you hear the little beep there? That was the camera focusing. Switch it back to manual focus so that it won't change, and then you can just lock the tripod. We've got our shot set up. Next, check the exposure. Just look through the viewfinder, and I've got my 50th of a second ready. F18, that's where it's going to work. We're now ready to shoot the next little piece of video. Flick on the live view, prick the go button, and this is Iworth Pond in the New Forest. It's a really pretty little place, and Lorna and I came down here to see what it would be like to film some videos. And stop. So there we go. So we've shot our first little piece of footage. Notice there was a gap and then I spoke, and then there was a gap and then I stopped it. What's the next bit going to be? So now to the second part of our establishing shot. We want to see more of the pond. Something that's great with the DSLR is it's really quick to pop it off the tripod if you have a quick release. Trying to take the camera Lorna's using off the tripod is a little bit more of a workup, I can assure you. So you can use whatever lens you like to capture what you want. I want to get a wider shot so we can see most of the pond, we can see the ducks, we can see what's going on here. You could put on a very wide angle 10mm, which will give you a nice dramatic sort of a look. But that's your call. I'm not going to mess around, I'm just going to use the 18 that I'm using already. So let's just kind of see where we need to be. Experiment. I think I want to be about here with my shot skimming down the edge. Chosen the spot, get the tripod. Now I know this is a little bit slower than running around, but it looks so much better. Right, line up the shot, check the horizon, make sure everything all looks good and the way you want it to. You've possibly got some of that wind noise I was talking about earlier bubbling away in the microphone, I don't know, but the breeze has just picked up. If you have, that's the noise I was talking about. Normally I'd put the microphone inside my shirt if I knew it was going to be breezy, but it wasn't. Anyway, here's my shot set up. Check the exposure, it's the same thing. So I'm looking through the viewfinder. I've got my 50th of a second for my 24 frames per second frame rate. Everything's ready to go. Autofocus, I want to focus, I don't know, about a third of the way out into the pond. Well, a third of the way about. There's some ripples just down here, if you can see them, just in front of this patch of lilies to the right. I'm focusing about where those ripples are. Because I'm using such a small aperture, I've got tons of depth of field. We've even got an obliging duck coming in, so I suggest it's time to hit the live view, check the composition and roll the camera. This is such an awesome place, you should really see it when the sun comes out. It's such a shame that it's just gone in. And then let it roll on for a few seconds afterwards. Now, ideally you'd choose a moment when there isn't any sound. I don't know if you could hear there's some people walking up the path, there's some kids playing over there, but it doesn't matter too much for the purpose of this illustration. Next we want to look at our details. Now the lilies. I've got my long lens on, I'm using the 200mm lens, and I would love to be able to use the f2.8 aperture to have a really shallow field of view and concentrate on one lily. But in this light I can't do that at the moment. I'm going to show you a way to do something similar in a minute or two. So I've set up my composition, I'm using the longer lens to isolate lilies on the water, avoiding the biscuit packet which is sitting on top of them. These are all things to notice, and again, it's the same old story. We check the exposure, which has changed very slightly, so I can decrease the aperture a bit. Sorry, widen the aperture a bit. On with the live view and hit the record button. I love these lilies just kind of floating gently on top of the pond. and then stop it. And also you run that extra bit there because you might not want to put the words "I love the lilies" on top of the pond. So if you've got a bit with no one speaking, you've still got the sounds of the quacks and the ducks and all that stuff going on. Trying to lure some ducks down to this end. A lady's just arrived throwing some bread in. So this is a great opportunity. Let me get the video in focus. I like the thought of these ducks just kind of swimming down there. Hit the video button and check the exposure. That's cool. Live view. Hit the video button. There's ducks, wildlife and all sorts of stuff going on down here. And there we go. So we can then cut the film there, and I want to see if I can get some close-ups using the long lens of some of these ducks. I prefer to look through the viewfinder when I'm composing shots. So I'm just going to keep the lens fairly long. I'm going to focus on a duck, if he'll keep still for long enough. Now don't be afraid to let things move around in the viewfinder. High view, roll it. What we're kind of waiting for is a duck to come toward, here we go, look. And that couldn't have been more perfect, could it? A duck just came straight towards us. And while they're milling around, just film it. But keep locking the camera on the tripod. Keep it nice and steady, so that as the ducks move around, we can get our shots. Awesome. I want to get a detail shot of these reeds with the light coming in from behind and the leaves next to them. I would like the background reeds to be soft, to be out of focus, so that's a shallower depth of field. Now I can't use my f2.8 at the moment because there's so much light and I still need a 50th of a second shutter speed. I have put a neutral density filter over the front of the lens. That's going to cut away some light, so instead of needing f22 I can now take myself down to an aperture of f10, which is way better. And because I'm fairly close with a long lens, I should still be able to blur the background. So I've focused on the leaves. I'm now ready to switch it on to live view, and I'm doing this quickly because I don't want to lose the light. I haven't got my lens hood on because I'm using a filter, so I need to shade the lens to ensure we don't get lens flare. And video recording. There are so many pretty little details down here, like the light through the reeds and the leaves. And then stop it. Now the reason I didn't rush off back and get another neutral density filter so that I really could utilise f2.8 as I could on this lens is by the time I'd done it, I'm afraid the sun might disappear. We've been actually sitting here for quite a long time trying to get that shot. So what does it all look like? This is Iworth Pond in the New Forest. It's a really pretty little place, and Lorna and I came down here to see what it would be like to film some videos. This is such an awesome place, you should really see it when the sun comes out. It's such a shame that it's just gone in. I love these lilies just kind of floating gently on top of the pond. There's ducks, wildlife and all sorts of stuff going on down here. So I hope you agree that that second bit of video footage was infinitely more interesting than the first. Digital SLRs are incredibly versatile bits of kit. I love the fact that you can bring all this creativity to play in some video. Sure, it's a little bit of a workup, it's a little bit of a faff, and you have to sort of get into a slightly different mindset because of thinking about sound, thinking about getting some atmos, some of the sort of sounds that are going on around that you can lay in the edit, thinking about how to expose using neutral density filters as opposed to just playing with your shutter speed. But nonetheless, I think it's an incredibly rewarding thing when you do look at a piece of video footage that you've put together, you've shot it and you've edited it and you think, I did that. I think that's a lovely feeling. If you'd like us to do some more video about video, then please post us some comments or wing us a couple of emails or leave some comments on the Facebook page. We'd love to know if you're interested. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to be notified each time we upload one of our cool photography videos, or for more great photo tips, workshops and training, come and see us at our website, photographycourses.biz.